Entry 51, this one is dated Wednesday, August 19th, 1964, and it's just a little over a page. And it deals with two key subjects, starting with the National Archives. Let's talk about that.
Mr. Rankin had an early contact with the National Archives because, among other reasons, we knew that the materials from the Commission would ultimately go to the National Archives, and we were interested in what their procedures were with respect to processing such materials and releasing them appropriately to the public. And we learned from this meeting, which was attended by myself and Al Goldberg, whom I invited to the meeting, because we wanted to adequately advise the archives of what we were producing. So in part, we were trying to describe to the archives the breadth and the volume of the materials we had generated in conducting the investigation, so he and his colleagues would have some understanding of what their mission would be. I asked Mr. Eckhoff what the procedures would normally be applied to our materials when they were provided to the archives. And he reported that their customary procedures for dealing with FBI materials was to not make them available to anyone except with the permission of the FBI. So I quote from the entry, quote, "As a result of this conversation, it became clear that unless instructed otherwise, none of our investigative materials which would be sent to archives would in fact be available to the public, even those not classified top secret, notwithstanding the intention and desires of the Commission," end quote. So after the meeting, I reported to Rankin my concern that the Commission's desires to have made public the documents given to the archives was not going to be accomplished unless there was a change in the normal procedures in the National Archives. At that point, he asked me to write a letter to the FBI raising with them the problem of publication of FBI interviews in our report, and also access to the FBI materials after they had been turned over to the archives. I forget whether I wrote such a letter, but I do remember learning that the FBI was certainly not opposed to including their reviews in our report and including them in the materials to be sent to the National Archives for release. But the problem actually was not resolved until a few months after the Commission completed its work. And at that time, someone from the public wrote a letter to the Chief Justice asking why certain of the Commission materials were not available to him. At which point the Chief Justice, I think, contacted someone in the White House to make further inquiry and learned that, in fact, the National Archives was following their traditional procedures. The Chief Justice expressed his views to the White House about the Commission's desire for a prompt publication of the materials by the National Archives. And then the White House, through President Johnson's action, issued an executive order to the National Archives to alter their procedures and to begin to process and make available to the public the materials that were at the archives that had come from the Commission, and with respect to classified materials, to declassify those which could be appropriately declassified at that point in time. So that began a long process, and a large volume of materials were produced. I don't have the exact figure in mind, but when I testified before the Congressional Committee in 1992, considering the JFK Act as a result of the
ARRB,
and created the ARB, I testified on behalf of the staff, and I think I was able to say something to the effect that more than 90% of the materials from the Commission were in the public domain. It may be as high as 98%, I forget. exactly, but it was in sharp contrast with the accessibility of the materials generated by the House Select Committee, which were also in the archives at that time. So the Chief Justice's intervention in January of 1965 and the President's prompt response to his concern did significantly shape and improve the availability of Commission materials to the public in the following decades.
Has it been disheartening to you that there is this perception, inaccurate as it may be, that there was this veil of secrecy over the Commission's work?
Well, yes, there has been a lack of understanding and in some cases deliberate misrepresentation about the availability of our materials. The fact remains, however, that no matter whether 98% of our materials are released or it's a smaller number, there still will be the complaint that the documents that have not been released are the key documents that will document the existence of a conspiracy of some kind, to which one could respond, if there were ever such documents, they wouldn't have been provided to the National Archives in the first place. But those arguments are absolutely impossible to resolve amicably. And as you know, there is now a program of release, but even the present administration apparently is yielding to representations by the agencies that some materials still, after 54 or more years, should not be released to the public. And again, within the research community, there is a significant concern as to the nature of these withheld documents, and lacking any explanation as to why documents after this period of time justify remaining classified.
Yeah. It's hard to imagine there still being confidential sources that are still active 55 years later.
That's right, and one could think only maybe there are descendants of informants who might be adversely affected if the name of their relative was revealed or whatever, but someday maybe you and I will have clarity on this subject.
Later in this entry, you had a good meeting with the Chief Justice. Tell me about that.
Yes, the Chief Justice had called the office on this day, which is August 19, and he had reviewed the section on Chapter 8, dealing with presidential protection. And he had his secretary asked that Norman Redlich come over to discuss Chapter 8. And Norman asked if I could come also, since this chapter was among those in which I had primary responsibility. So far, Norman was concerned. So both of us did go over, and the Chief Justice was exceptionally cordial and relaxed. He clearly was pleased that we had reached the point, finally, of completing this mission that he had never sought. And he had only two issues that he wanted to raise with us. First, in another positive impact in Chapter 8 was that we proposed legislation that would clearly declare as a federal crime the assassination of the president, and I think certain other federal officials, no matter where they were located, whether they were on public lands or on Main Street in Dallas. And his concern about the proposed legislation as outlined, I think, was that it may have intimated and maybe even provided that the death penalty would be the result of a successful conviction of a presidential assassin. He did not want to have a reference to such a penalty in the legislation. He thought that was a matter for Congress to concern. Mm-hmm. And it's quite clear he had some personal distaste with respect to the death penalty. So we said that was very easy to correct. And his second concern was a little more vague, but a little more optimistic, in that he wanted the last paragraph in Chapter 8, which was the last substantive paragraph, and therefore the end of the report, before the reader went in to explore the appendices. He wanted to have something more positive about President Kennedy and the effort to protect presidents in the future. And I explained we had explored a certain variety of the last paragraphs, and we appreciated that suggestion, and most of us were in favor of that, and we would alter the paragraph accordingly. I don't know exactly what the last paragraph reads at this time, and whether it, but I'm sure it reflects what we could do in order to accommodate the Chief Justice. So he could not have been more friendly or respectful, and we enjoyed the meeting. And I left feeling that, although I had, from time to time, had concern with the Chief Justice's decisions, I had enormous respect for the man who was truly a giant in the legal field, an extraordinary human being. And he had combined his responsibilities at the court and as chairman of the commission in a way that I think few public servants would have been able to do.
You certainly get a sense of his character in the course of this journal, and it's difficult to emerge from it without a great deal of respect for the Chief Justice. Regardless of how you feel about the Kennedy assassination, he certainly was a dedicated taskmaster when it came to the work of this commission.